Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina-r-Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and today we are going to be talking about midlife reinvention, empty nest, happy nest, how we can reinvent ourselves in our second half, this new journey of living. So today, my guest is Judy Holland. She's an author, a journalist, the founder of Parent Insider Online magazine, and Capitol Hill commentator. Her book, Happiness: Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home, is the current book that we are going to be kind of springboarding off of. So without further ado, I want to thank you, Judy, for saying yes to me today.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me. This is interesting. We're bi-coastal today, Gina, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Time zones different, but hearts in the same place.
You got it. I'm coming from Washington, D.C. If I look here, I can see on my left the National Cathedral, and I'm not far from the Capitol, where I was a journalist for many years, also covering your lawmakers. I covered Dianne Feinstein, and I covered Barbara Boxer for years from the Senate.
Very fascinating. Well, why don't you tell us, how did you get to this point from that kind of political career to where you are now in this message that you have about reinvention and having a happy nest when your kids leave home?
Well, probably because I reinvented. So I basically have three kids and a husband here in Washington, D.C. And the one kind of theme that runs through everything I've done since I was 4 is I write. I was writing when I was 4 and stitching little cardboard books together with yarn and submitting them to publishers. And I've always been writing. I was studying literature and writing in college. I got a master's degree from Northwestern in journalism. So I've been writing forever. But I came to Capitol Hill so many years ago, and I loved it. Capitol Hill was so fun. It was so many issues, Gina, really important issues, kids and poverty and AIDS and just how do we handle things and what's the best way we hammer it out. So I did that for, my gosh, about 13 years in the Senate Press Gallery while raising 3 kids. But then, I'm 60, and I'm proud to tell you that I'm 60. I'm 60, and I'm good about 60. I'm 60, feel like I'm 38. That's all very fortunate and lucky. But anyway, I was on the Hill for a long time, and I felt like, I started seeing stories coming around again and again. And there's only so many times you can write the flag burning story. And, there's a lot of interesting stuff about stem cells and abortion and everything. But after a while, I thought I wanted to write more about relationships, close relationships, people, life, psychology, philosophy. So I made a switch. And for like 5 years, I created an online magazine for parents of teens. I've closed that since, parentinsider.com, but I've got lots of videos, like professional ones I co-produced on YouTube about parenting. And then my kids got older and they left. So I decided that I have 1 out of college and 2 in. So I decided to look at this phase of life kind of existentially as a journalist. And so I read about probably 60, 80 books. I read probably 100 academic papers, and I interviewed about 300 people. And I went from California to Vermont to, up and down the East Coast, and found all kinds of different people. I like different people, different places they come from. I like variety. So that's what I did. And I put this book together, and much to my complete shock and surprise, it's gotten like crazy reviews on Publishers Weekly, AARP, on Library Journal. And so anyway, now I'm just continuing with it from there. And like you, I'm a podcaster. I do a happiness podcast as well.
I have that. We're going to put that in the notes as well. So if you're listening to this and driving, don't you worry. Everything she shares will be in the notes. So tell us a little bit about this new journey. How are you enjoying it? And how did you go about reinventing yourself? Because someone who might be feeling that urge to have something new and different in their life might not know where to begin. So why don't you share a little bit of that process?
Right, absolutely. So, I'm a research-based creature. I like data and I love professor people. Like, I just love them. I think it's amazing how much they can find out. And I feel so fortunate that I can call them up and kind of help them boil down and get out what they've learned. So for me, I was feeling concerned and worried about this phase of life. You know, I come from a family of 5 kids, and I've got, you know, two have chronic illnesses. One has MS, one has Parkinson's. And, you know, my parents are older. My friend is dying of cancer. I look at these things and I realize that 60, you know, in your 50s and you're in 60 and upwards, we start seeing more about life that's jarring, that doesn't make sense. And while I've got Buddhist tendencies and transcendentalist tendencies, and I was raised somewhat Calvinist, you know, I tend to search in the real world and among thinkers to make sense out of things like illness, like the impermanence, the Buddhist impermanence of things. So Gina, I started to read, and I started to digest papers, and when I found an interesting professor, an interesting researcher, I said, who else do you know that knows about how we cope with loss? Or, you know, and so that got me on this big trajectory of this 11-chapter book where I looked at, I've not been divorced, but I looked in great depth at divorce. You know, I have kids that are young adults, have gotten older. I looked in great depth at what are those relationships and how do we change them? I looked at marriage. You know, if you are still married at this point, it's a critically important relationship. And so I studied at great length how to make marriage better. And all of these things completely changed my life in every way. And I removed all the anxiety, all the worry, and I live much more gracefully now, but I'm just fully informed.
Awesome. So what was your first step? You said, okay, I'm on Capitol Hill. I've had this career. I want to do something different.
Yeah. So again, my initial step, because I still had kids at home, was to interview a couple of hundred people in greater DC, psychologists, psychiatrists, coaches, researchers about raising teenagers, because then I had teens, and I got a model from that. It was interesting. These people know such cool stuff. And so I wrote articles and made videos, but then my kids left home. My baby is today turned 21. Today.
Happy birthday to your baby.
Thank you. I just got off the phone with him. And so I felt like this next phase of life was something, the empty nest. I don't like to say empty nest. I'm not the glass half empty guy at all. I'm not. That's why I say happy nest for my book. But I started to just think that, you know, things really do change, Gina. And we get older and we've got lines on our face and maybe we need highlights, and, you know, we get constant reminders. Even if you get, like, if you need a root canal, you go, oh my gosh, I'll never have that tooth again. I mean, that seems silly. I see you laughing at me, but that's a real thing, right?
Oh, I've had like 5 or 6. So I'm like, oh, I'm way past that.
You are so over that. Okay. Well, I had one and I was like, oh my gosh, this is just yet another reminder that life is going by. So anyway, so I started, I had an agent, because I've done some other types of writing, and I had an agent, and I called him and I said, I'm really thinking about this phase, and I think I want to write this. And he said, okay. And I said, well, I went out and I looked at all the different books that were out there. Mainly they were the world according to me books, not to denigrate. And I mean, a lot of these people did good things. One woman wrote, you know, The Empty Desk with the Dog, and wrote a really funny book about a dog. But I wanted to do a book with lots of sources that then I could boil down and make simple for someone with a dog barking and, you know, someone pulling on their knee and the TV on and a beer. So I and as a journalist, that's what I've been trained to do. So I just embarked. I sat right where you see me here at my desk, looking out at the National Cathedral, and I sat down and I just started to work into research. And 5 months later, my agent had a book and he shopped it around, and the rest was history. But you asked me about my reinvention.
Yes, exactly. So the steps that you took was, you just, sounds like what you did was turn toward what interested you.
And research, And then I started to look at things. Like the first thing I looked at was my marriage, because I grew up, in this time, again, at my age and everything, we were especially if you had multiple kids, we are what researchers call kid-centric in this generation. It's harder, Gina, for my kids to make their way than it was for me or my mother to make her way. And I didn't know all the data that I know now, but I understood that. So we tended to be a generation that a little bit ignored the spouse and just tried to help the kid. Can you catch that lacrosse ball? Are you okay on this field? How's the singing going? Because we were even maybe just subconsciously aware that we really, that it was going to be harder for our kids. But Gina, that kind of is, you end up kind of ignoring your spouse. So, and I did that a little bit, and so I decided, okay, how do I reinvent this relationship? So I started to look at a number of ways that you can do that. And I started talking to researchers about it. And then I slowly started applying these things. And and then everyone I knew, I'm also a photographer, so I know lots of people started asking me, my gosh, what are you doing? And where'd you get that idea? Can we have lunch and talk about it? And I thought, well, I feel like in the second half of life, which is a generous thing for me to say, probably the last third, I feel like I'm in more of an altruism phase. I want to give back what I have. And what I have is not science. It's not math. What I have is I can write and I can ask people things and boil it down. So I decided to put this together.
So when you talk about reinventing your marriage, this is probably the starting point, because a lot of people in their second half, marriages have suffered for different reasons. Could have been work, could have been children, could have been wrong priorities, could have been forgetting why we chose this person in the first place. I myself am also still married to my college sweetheart. So,
wow.
But I know the journey of choosing on a daily basis and trying to find the balance. It's a difficult thing in our fast-paced world to keep track of everything. But I feel like if we put those blocks in the right order. So when we're talking about reinventing, I think getting that foundational relationship settled is a great place to start, so that we don't have that emotional confusion or frustration or even anger, like getting the work done to get the cracks fixed. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. So the first thing that I found that I thought was really cool, in fact, and I just finished digesting a podcast related to this topic because I keep coming back to it. I'm so interested in it. The first thing that I came across was this concept, Gina, of novelty, of pursuing novel experiences. And I'll tell you about that. First, I'm going to quote to you Shelby Foote, the historian. I gave a speech once on novelty. And Shelby Foote says, of all the passions of mankind, the love of novelty most rules the mind. In search of this, from realm to realm, we roam. Basically, the human brain seeks novel experiences, because through novel experiences, new experiences, you grow. And there's also this cool physiological thing going in that you even, a novel experience, Gina, doesn't have to be expensive. You can wander through a new part of the city. You can try a new kind of cuisine. You can play racquetball that you've never played before with your spouse, if you do things, or with a romantic partner. And the amazing thing is you get this dopamine flash, and you can actually measure that on functional MRI machines and see the blood flow and the dopamine lighting up. But what that does, Gina, is if you're doing a novel experience with a partner, then you associate the joy and the excitement that you feel with that person. And that idea is so fascinating to me. In a way, it seems like it's a little bit of a trick, but not really. I mean, so novel experiences are so important. And again, people that study the psychology and neurobiology of romantic love keep coming up with that. You become, through novel experiences, you become elated and you associate the good feelings you feel with your mate. And so started talking to people. I got all the research and crunched the numbers and made big long papers into little short digestible things for my book. And then I went out to find people doing cool, novel things. And I found one couple. They were both professors who studied relationships, and they were doing ballroom dancing. And that was novel for both of them. And they were describing that it was dancing, Gina, was kind of a metaphor for life, because you've got to keep the right distance. You've got, and you're going to flub. You're going to, and then you're going to work with your partner on that and through that. So dancing is something that I have found again and again. I found another set of professors who actually, they were like psychoanalyst kinds of people, and they were doing the Argentine tango, which apparently is really complicated. You've heard that, right?
And I think it's also extremely sensual.
It's sensual, and it's complicated, and people do it in groups. In fact, they travel like around the world or anywhere they're going, and they find the other people who do the Argentine tango. So then you open one door, Gina, and it's amazing how many more open doors are behind that. So again, through just looking at the prism of novelty, I found so many things. Diversions like dancing foster mystery, intrigue, unpredictability. And again, there's lots of research on this in Canada and in the United States. And to me, that was just amazing. And so I have made changes. Like, I will choose to go somewhere and do something with my husband that is different. Now, you don't want to do something really scary or inappropriate for you, because that can evoke the wrong response, right? But you find something you both agree on. So again, my husband and I also did some dancing. And actually at one point, though, there was a wine store that gave free samples outside. So then you have 2 glasses of wine, and you probably shouldn't. You're not as good as you are at dancing. But we just love doing that. And neither one of us was a master at that to begin with. My husband was a golfer. I'm not going to play golf with him. I don't want to play golf. And he's really good at golf. This is another thing you should do. You should do things. You should keep doing things alone, and keep doing the things that keep you excited alone. And then you bring that to the relationship.
I have to agree that the biggest conversation when you have an empty nest or a happy nest is the marriage or the romantic relationship. And I agree wholeheartedly with the idea of keeping some things separate. There's a healthiness to having your own interests so that you're developing as a person, your mind, your emotions, you're growing individually, and you bring that back, and it only enhances like a good spice. It does that for your marriage. It gives you something interesting to talk about. It gives you something interesting to contribute. It creates conversation, right?
Right.
My husband and I, it might be a podcast or a book or the things that we're pursuing. And it's a good thing to not have to do everything together. Maybe people feel like, oh, great, it's just me and him, and now we have to do everything together. But I don't think that's true.
And these psychoanalysts who did the Argentine tango looked at that in depth, and they said lockstep. Moving in lockstep is not good. And I had dinner with them, this couple, and the man put one hand above and the other one a little below, and showed that we should be moving. You should be moving in tandem, but not in lockstep. And it's exactly right. I do my podcast, I do my writing, I do different, I figure skate, I do things that my husband doesn't know. And I bring back excitement and stories and enthusiasm. And that's and again, that's another form of novelty to link us to the first thing we spoke about, because it's having, if you dare to keep, stepping out of your box, you might not want to write a book and do a podcast. And I'm starting to do public speaking, that's a little bit out of my groove, but I'm coming back with new ideas and new techniques. And my husband does some similar things, and we'll come back with stories. I've heard that there are a very small percentage of couples that can move in lockstep, but I'm not in that population.
I'm not either, my friend. I love encouraging my husband to become who he's supposed to be, because this whole thing is a journey. Our season of life that we're in, we've done our season with the different parts of our life, raising children, a career, whatever it is. And so each season, remembering that our spouse is another human being. Yes, it's like our children. Yes, they're our children, but they're another human being. They're going to feel differently, maybe decide differently. They're going to experience the same things we experience differently. And I think maybe there's an element of curiosity that can help that relationship as well.
Right.
Getting to know your partner again through different eyes. A lot has passed under the bridge. It's easy to assume we know everything, but we really don't, because we've changed and they've probably changed. And so that's another way of keeping out of lockstep, is really recognizing that there's space there for them to be someone different and maybe have different thoughts than we expect. And good conversation is a great way to figure out where a person's head is at.
Right, especially, and we're a right brain, left brain combination. I'm somebody left to my druthers want. I'm interested in languages and in literature and in philosophy. And my husband is a scientist. He studied biology on purpose in college. Like, I couldn't, I'm like, really? But he can wax on about, if I listen and engage him, he can tell me some fascinating things about biology and about, I can see that he sees the world. He sees animal behavior really differently than I do. I don't see that level. I'll go into a museum with him that's got some science bent to it, which I wouldn't go in alone. But then I'll just hear the excitement and the knowledge, and I have new excitement and respect for him. And I appreciate the differences. Gina, there's another thing on that list, now that we have added novelty on this one, is I came across really amazing, interesting research about the value of double dating. Okay, so if you are going and if you've raised some kids, the kids have gone, it's very natural to keep talking about the kids and perseverating about there's always something wrong at some point with some kid. It's impossible that everything is right. It's just all the time. So, but anyway, double dating, I have really deliberately done this. I just came back from California from a lacrosse game I was attending, and we spend an evening with a couple that we love from the East Coast that happened to be out there. And we had so much fun. And the magic of double dating, again, there's data behind it. It resets your interactions. It changes what you talk about. We have 3 couples we regularly see, and they all bring out different sides of ourselves. I have my husband's a physician, and we go out with 2 other physicians sometimes. And then they'll talk about, they'll talk about the moon or something. They'll talk about physics. They'll talk about, and I don't think of those things. So then I end up in a really different conversation, and I don't sit there and criticize my husband about his sweatpants on the floor because I'm talking about the moon. So double dating is fascinating. There are books on it that I've read and research on it that I've read. And so that is something I have really incorporated into my empty nest, second half of life reinvention, is I really reach out and plan ahead, and I find other couples or other people to invite in, to bring our dogs for a long walk on the along the canal, it doesn't have to be a huge project, but it's phenomenal the fun that comes back in your life. And fun is so critical in marriage, that comes back in your life through interactions with another couple. The last thing about that I've just remembered is that so we can watch both good and bad things from a double date, right? Haven't you ever gone somewhere with another couple and somebody just ridicules the other one, or just says things that are shocking? And these are really good, according to psychologists and people who study double dating in couples, because they make you aware. They make you rethink your relationship and how you respond. I see something like that, and I'm so careful that I'm not going to be that critical or bring a negative energy in. And then I see people that are nicer to their spouse than I tend to be. And I think, and I kind of study that and I think about it and I re-examine and I wonder if I ought to adjust it. So that to me is just a hugely magic, easy to do thing. And again, it's not like you have to make a roast beef and invite people over for dinner with the candles. You can go for a walk. You can, throw a ball. I mean, there's just about anything that you can do. I actually tend to think the best things in life are free, and they're just sort of clever, creative things that we do with our everyday surroundings.
There is a power in that community in every area of our life. But I agree with you. When you go on a double date and you find people that you can, the 4 of you or the 6 of you can all connect with someone, there is magic in that. And it also expands. Like we might be looking for expansion, but it will expand them as well.
Right. And they say that, interestingly, I mean, I'm not big for pointing out gender differences, but there are some, at least at this period in time. And ostensibly, like, women can get a lot of help in their marriage by having another woman there, because another woman will tend to talk about things that are more of interest to women, or that maybe they'll talk more about a particular issue with a kid or with a marriage or something, and that won't come up otherwise, but it will with 4 people. So to me, that's a huge thing. There's another point too, so aside from like what you do with a couple, and there are plenty of people, there's an epidemic of what we call gray divorce. That's over 50 divorce. So there are many people who are alone. So it's not, I don't mean only to talk about a spouse, but, because there are many things we can do. But one thing that's really important, I think, if you've had kids that you've been really involved with, as I was, is that you need a little quiet time to resurrect interests, to reassess your values and priorities. You need to focus internally, for a while after your kids leave, to get a better understanding of your interests at this phase of your life, because we're going to be interested in different things at different phases. To rethink hard about your values, about your passions, and about your strengths. And then I think one of the most important things is to, intersect all of those things, your talents, your passions, your strengths, what you've been trained to do, with what the world needs. And if you get that magic combination, with a mission, you've got a mission in what you're doing there. I can articulate a mission. Then you've got meaning. Then you've got fulfillment. It's not just fun, but it's a bigger connection to things. And it's it stabilizes us, against some of the inevitable disappointments and progression of life.
This idea that we need to get quiet is so important. We've had such busy lives up to this point, right? And for some of us, we're taking care of parents. Our kids are still transitioning to stability. Like you said, marriages could have failed. They could be failing. They could be thriving. There's so many different things going on. That quiet time is a very big step in the reinvention process. We have to know what we're thinking now, not what we used to think. I would wager that some women are just thinking what they're used to thinking, and they're feeling that disconnect, or they're feeling out of alignment, and they don't know why, because they haven't had a chance to know who they are now.
Right.
And what no longer works for them.
But Gina, you understand there's an impulse not to take that reflective, quiet time.
It's scary.
Because it's scary, and it's always hard. The Buddhists talk about this. It's tough to examine, and it's tough to look internally, but honestly, it's the only real path for figuring out what we need to do. And I can't tell you what you need to do, or my husband or anyone else, but I can, again, take an inventory of my passions, my training, my talents, and figure out where the value is. don't need to be cooking for a soup kitchen. I cooked for my kids all these years, and I don't really want to cook anymore. I'm sick of always cooking for 5 people. So, but there are many other things I can do. One thing I do is I love writing, and I'm really interested in education. I work with some first-gen kids who are applying to colleges, and I help them brainstorm and come up with essays for college. And that's something that I can really offer. Nobody wants my baked beans at a soup kitchen.
I'm with you on the cooking. I don't want to cook for other people. It's interesting how there are clues in our lives. Sometimes we feel like we have to stay with the same thing, but the key with reinvention is you don't have to do the same thing, but the clues are in who you've been and what you've done.
Right? Absolutely. So you look back. This is what I say. Look back to your childhood. I mean, Gina, I told you I was sitting down at 4 and 6, with the dinner bell ringing and my mother mad at me that all the other 4 kids had already arrived at the dinner table, and I was writing things. And so I look back to that and I realized that's just something that makes sense out of my world. It might not be, it isn't for lots of other people. I don't want to put a model airplane together. I'm not 3-dimensional, but you look back into your youth and figure out, what those things were. Go look at a magazine rack and see which subjects, if you were on a 21-hour flight, which subjects would you pick out if you were trapped on an airplane? What are you interested in? These are all little, revisit your path, let your internal GPS guide you, see what lit you up, and start making a list of things that make you come alive, because I promise you there is some way to overlap that with what the world needs, which then brings all kinds of great feelings and interactions and opens doors you didn't even know existed. There are many people that go out and volunteer in an area they're interested in. They can play the French horn. They work with some sort of inner city group in the French horn, and before they know it, they've got a job or a new avenue or a new band. But it's really about taking those steps and having the courage to take those steps, but don't take them recklessly. Focus internally, figure out what those steps should be. I have a friend with a book out. She's a big Buddhist and spent a lot of time in monasteries, and she is a big advocate. I've started doing it, of journaling to bring clarity to these ideas. Maybe you wake up in the morning and you write a little bit about what's your intention, what do you want to do for the day, and that is useful for me and for a lot of people, for just bringing clarity to what you're doing. But again, I think the overarching thing here, now that we're not in our 30s, we're not scrambling to figure out what our first career is and everything, is to really look at the greater good. Because I'm promising you, this is not about being a broke do-gooder. If you look at the greater good, you can find a way to overlap your talents with what the world needs. And then there's an amazing place for you. There is something transcendent out there. And I'm actually working on a speech on this whole concept, because I think it's, people might think they can't afford to do it, or they don't have time to do it, or I'm not a do-gooder, but it's really not about that. It's about meaning and fulfillment and how we get there.
You talked about journaling to clarify ideas. The neuroscience is behind that. It unclutters the mind when you're using your hand, not typing, but you literally do pen to paper and you write things out. Wow. It's a mental process. So it helps the mind to take the information and begin to put it into place. It's actually when we walk.
Yes, I mean, walking to
the mind into another place, and all of a sudden ideas start to flow and that sort of a thing. So there's things we can do that are physically and biologically connected to help us work through. Because if we think, but we don't do anything physically to work those thoughts out in a reinvention process, we're just going to feel overwhelmed.
Right.
If we can, I always had this analogy that our thoughts are like birds in our mind, right? Our mind is the cage. And when we don't control our thoughts, it's like the birds have gotten out of the cage and they're just flying around, feathers and poop everywhere, right? And so how do we get the birds back into the cage? We have to find a way to control those thoughts. And journaling is a great way to do it, because it gets them back in order, and they don't have to come out in order. This is the thing about journaling. People think you have to write volumes, But journaling is one of those things where you might find yourself saying something on paper that you haven't even realized has been mulling around in your brain because it's been buried under all of the other things that we have in our head. So I definitely agree wholeheartedly with the journaling, because it's a physiological handwriting to paper activity that does things for the brain.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then walking, and that's another thing that I've got a couple of sections on in my book. And again, there's research in walking and walking in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it's the same thing. I've also written some fiction, and I will write myself into a corner and be so frustrated, or, just upset that a family member's not well, or, and I have a Great Dane. I have a 155-pound Great Dane, and I might take her for 3 miles. And that's very different. I spent most of my life, distance running, 4 to 6 miles a day. But that's a really different thing, Gina. That's huffing and puffing. It's not a collection. You don't notice the leaf on the tree because you're making sure you don't slip on the branch. And so walking is something that I do now. And I was totally shocked to look at research and find out that you actually can burn the same calories in, walking but you got to walk a lot farther. But still, it's a wonderful thing, and it puts my universe in order, and I tend to get ideas for things that I'm writing or things that I want to do, and it just brightens my mood. And it's so simple, and it doesn't cost anything. Couples walking together, that's a huge thing. It's a tradition in a lot of Europe, and especially in Switzerland. People go hiking and walking, and you just see pairs of two everywhere walking. And I spoke to a researcher who moved to Switzerland for a while and started doing the same thing with his wife. And the other thing that he did was unplug the phone unless they needed it for navigation, because then a spouse gets upset. If my husband keeps checking his text when I'm trying to tell him something and we're walking, that's upsetting to me. So if you can turn that off and just interact, thoughts and ideas just kind of unwind slowly as you're walking. So that's another one of the magic things. One other thing that I think is huge, and I've done a chapter on, is friendships. Second half of life friendships, cultivating them, maintaining them, which is so huge, and finding new ones, the right ones, the ones with a lot of soul per square inch. And that's a huge thing. People tend to prune, and I found a lot of research on this. They tend to weed out and prune their friendship circles as they get older. But if that makes sense, Gina, I don't know about you. When I was in my 20s, I'd go places with almost anybody just because I thought if they were different and interesting and I could learn something from them. But now I need people that are a little bit more on my way, a lot more on my wavelength if I'm going to spend any real time with them. You can find those things, new friendships, by simply being authentic to what your interests and passions are. And if you go do those things, which might be photography or a biking group or a cooking class, anything like that, you find people with common interests. Those are people you'll connect with. And then the connection to them, there's a wonderful psychologist at Yale, Margaret Clark, that I've interviewed, and she says that men sometimes make these new friendships but have trouble maintaining them because for sociological reasons, they're not as good at revealing vulnerabilities. So women connect. And if I go find somebody through a photography gig or, whatever, maybe you like to collect wildflowers, or I don't know, all the hobbies people would have. You even like to go hiking. You find people that like to do what you want to do, but you can't just present sunshine and light. I mean, I'm not saying that you're looking for someone like a therapist or a counselor. You don't want to just dump things on people, but by sharing vulnerabilities, you connect with new people like that. And there's a huge world of people out there, and there's an epidemic of loneliness in this country that's causing so many problems. It causes early mortality and depression. So that is a huge thing that I say. And then I've made a point to look up and pull back old friends that live far away that are so important in my past. And I really make a point, old friends and relatively new friends, I really reach out. I really make a point if I'm going to be in some area to overlap, even for it's just for a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. And it makes like all the difference in the world. It's huge to me, you know?
I was thinking about, as you talked about friendships, I have noticed that this season of life, there's a lot of natural shift in relationships. Not that anything bad has happened or that there's even been conflict, but it just seems like sometimes when people move toward a new direction in life, when you're reinventing yourself, sometimes people don't go with you. It's not that you don't love them or they're not important, but for whatever reason, when we pursue change on that level, sometimes people will choose to pull back, you know, and that's an interesting part of the journey that I like to highlight, because we have to trust and walk in faith to the thing that is authentic to us.
Right.
And trust that those right relationships for that season, not that those people are wrong, but there are relationships that make sense right now. Someone new could come into your life, or someone you haven't talked to for a while might be fitting in better right now, or understanding your journey better right now. And so you kind of have to drop the judgment and just hold a space for whoever's willing to take your journey with you now.
Right. Absolutely. And also this is, you've just reminded me of a piece of research that I've got a chunk on this in my book, and I've been fascinated about this for a while. I think I'm going to give a speech on it. So I came across this professor. I met him at Harvard, and his name is Mario Luis Small, and he studies the confidence. He studies the people that you meet in your daily travels that can hugely brighten your life and change your perspective on things, teach you things. And so he's done lots of research. He wrote a book, Someone to Talk To, and he researched, basically, Gina, you and I have both been on a plane, and you end up telling, or the other person ends up telling, like a deep, dark secret to the person next to them on the plane, right? People that you come across in your daily travels can hugely bolster your emotional health, and they can often share your deepest secrets. And often you go to the same places as some of these people because you have shared interests and values. You might, I found when I was interviewing this man that I had such a connection to the man because he was in the middle of a book, and so was I. And we were both going, oh my gosh, can you ever get to the end of this? And what about these footnotes? And I have this problem with the structure. And then I realized I'm talking like really intensely with this man in his 30s that's a professor because we have common ground. He said he had this, I believe he said he lost his father. And so he got in a conversation with someone else who had recently lost their father. And it was a stranger, at a conference or something. But there's huge commonality and there's so much human connection. And we don't want to walk through life, especially at this phase of life, with blinders on. You want to be aware of who's around you. And I am very much an extrovert, but I naturally engage. If I buy a cup of coffee somewhere, I might comment on somebody's shoes or on the dog that's tied to their chair outside, things like that. And there's amazing connection to that. And through that, you also can find intergenerational friendships, which is another area of research that I've been on, which is so interesting that so many people, like I do a ballet bar early every morning. I used to be a figure skater and I love movement and music. And I have lots of women my daughter's age who I really know. And I even go have a cup of coffee with them or a bowl of soup. And I can give them advice from some, work-life balance advice. And they tell me things that, relate to technology or a new band in town or something. And there's just a wonderful connection. So I think it's about being sort of liberally minded and open-minded and connecting to those around you, because there's no reason to be lonely.
One of my dearest friends is way closer to my oldest daughter's age than mine, but we have similarity in mindset. We have similarity in the way that we pursue our goals and the way that we think. And it's a very vibrant relationship. And she just shouted me out on Instagram yesterday, because when you find someone in the world that really gets you, it doesn't matter how old they are. It's just someone that you can link arms with and take the journey. Someone who can hold a space for you. I think age is, when we were in school, we had no choice but to spend all of our time with everybody our age, which was not great.
Right.
As an adult, you have the choice, like you said, to choose to open your eyes and find connection throughout the day. Even if it's a 2-minute connection, it doesn't have to become a long-term relationship, but there's a benefit to allowing ourselves to be open to someone and allowing them to share with us. I don't know if you're like me, but people are always telling me their stories.
Yes.
I've had hundreds of people in random places just pour out their heart to me. And I just hold the space for them, because you don't know what part you're playing in the journey. And this reinvention that we're talking about, while it sounds very myopic, like me, what do I want to do? Who do I want to be? I love how you're turning it to, yes, the reinvention is about you, but it's part and parcel in who you're connected to. There's that otherness that's involved. It's your partner. It's your friendships. It's your
how you serve the greater good by
Yes.
using what you've got, because we're not just going to dish up our talents and our work for. It's not just for ourselves. Nothing. We're interdependent creatures, and that's what we're doing. And I think sometimes people kind of separate. They think that there's a do-gooder thing, or there's that's a non-profit-y kind of thing. But it's really not that. It's that we need this greater connectivity. And it's really a pretty simple thing to do.
Yeah. And I think for some people, that could be the first step of reinvention. Just find somewhere to serve or give, whether it's in a relationship, in an organization. It doesn't have to be, like you said, your life's purpose forever and ever, but just begin to investigate what brings you joy and allows you to serve someone else. Because I think that symbiosis between us and them is where that competence, confidence, joy, connectivity all begins to work its magic.
Right. And just so still on the subject of relationships and friendships is I've interviewed this great psychologist named Elaine Chung at Northwestern University, and she's done a lot of study in an area of what she calls emotionships. So no one other person, not your spouse, not your best friend, can meet all of your emotional needs. You need somebody who can encourage you to dare to take a chance. You need somebody who can help you when you fall down, to help you in tragedy, there's so many to coach you career-wise. So we need a village. We need a stable of relationships to help us, which this Elaine Chung calls emotionships. We need a diverse stable of friends to provide fun, learning, connection, communication. So what I also suggest at this phase is take stock of those people. There was a time when I expected my husband to meet all 10 emotional needs of mine, and he can't. Nobody can. And I argue that may be one of the reasons a lot of marriages fall apart, because and there's research actually to that effect, that we are demanding so much from the spouse. We expect them to be everything, our emotional partner, our career counselor, our sports partner, and no one person can do that. So, look out there and cultivate, maintain. Many of us do have parents that we've got to tend to, and kids that boomerang back or have different issues, but you really can make space and time for these types of things. And it's how you enrich life.
When you talk about those emotionships, I think when we are so hyper-focused on what we need from a spouse or a friend, we don't leave space for them to be who they are. And that kills us. It kills them, it kills the relationship. So I think in this whole idea of reinvention and all of these things that you're talking about, there's this greater sense of curiosity and openness and thinking differently
Mm-hmm.
about ourselves and the people that we're in relationship with. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we're better at identifying our unhealthy habits and more open to change. I think this second season of life, you talked about the TikTok, that line that Marissa Tomei says in the movie, my biological clock is ticking. We just know that time is more of the essence. You don't feel that same urgency at 20 as you do at 50, 60,
Right.
70. And
Yeah.
so why not get about the business of living a life that's more on purpose? If reinvention feels like too big of a word, then maybe the better word would be, for someone who feels intimidated by that, intentional living.
Right. More purposeful, a little bit more deliberate, more thoughtful. And again, in this time of life, this is the time we have the ability to turn inward. We have a huge, stable of information and knowledge from years. And so this is the time to tap that. There's a lot of richness there, and to tap that and to look inward and then reinvent. And again, the research that I've done into this book, my book, Happiness, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home, has completely and utterly changed the way I look at life. I'm much braver. I'm much more adventurous with things. And I think what I've been able to do is strip away the fear, fear of failure, fear of trying different new things. I think I wasn't terribly fearful to begin with. I'm a journalist. I'm used to new things, but nevertheless, we all stumble over just being out of our zone. And I've just gotten really comfortable with being outside my comfort zone, but in a wise, practical way, and one that is in tune with my interests.
Being comfortable, being outside your comfort zone, I think is a huge part of the second half of life, because everything feels so much more like you turn 18, everybody says, what are you going to do with the rest of your life, right? There's like these kind of semi-clear steps that everyone expects you to take. And then there's this point that I call midlife or peak life. And all of a sudden you're kind of back to being 18 again. Like, what are you going to do with your life? But with all this experience and all this potential baggage and knowledge. And it's a bit more daunting in some ways, but it's also easier because we've lived enough life that we have access to like you said, a stable of information. We could even ask 5 people that we love and trust, healthy people. I always like to say, make sure they're healthy people, and say, what are the 3 things you think I'm really good at? Whether it's a relationship skill or an actual practical skill, and
Right.
compile a list from people that know you and have known you. And that could really be a good directional tool.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I haven't thought of it like that. I think that's good. Interestingly, Gina, you just triggered in my mind. There's a lot of research that shows that in midlife, we are actually overall more effective than we are at 30, at 20, maybe in our early 40s, because we've gained so much, and we've had to resolve so many problems and issues. If you've raised kids, you've had to be diplomatic with coaches, all kinds of people. So while indeed we do lose some memory skills, no matter how you work on that, we lose some things. We lose some muscle tone. We lose things. That's inevitable. But overall, we are more effective, and all we need to do is muster that ability that is really a gift of time. There's a lot of benefit, and I think you and I both grew up in an ageist society that I hope we're slowly going to see changing. That's why I emphasize that this really, research shows now. I'm just barely a boomer, but the research shows that at this phase of life, that boomers, people whose kids have recently left, we are in a position to have, to make this emptiness, second half of life, last third of life, whatever it is, the best, most golden phase. There are so many reasons for that. Everything from the internet to the way we get information, ways that we can work and connect virtually, better health, longevity. We're living 25, 30 years longer. We're in a really different place. It's about remaining connected to people. I think that's, and getting out there. You've just got to get out. and connect and follow your interests. And some people have to push themselves and really muster courage and bravery more than others. But, it's a muscle. Courage is a muscle that we can cultivate.
I love that. Courage is a muscle that we can cultivate. Well, now we've talked for almost an hour. This is the time when we get to, Judy, wrap up a whole hour of great conversation to kind of 3 bite-sized things that the listeners can kind of, if they are mustering the courage, what 3 things could you offer them to just start with? These are like the next best steps. No need to get overwhelmed. It's a journey, right? It's not the destination. Just keep taking the journey. So What are your 3 suggestions?
Absolutely. And number 1, recapping on relationships, close relationships, cultivate relationships, reconnect, call that old college buddy of yours, reconnect, cultivate, put yourself out there. You do have to, it's a little bit like being a suitor with an old friend or with new friends, but put yourself out there and make your life rich in relationships. Because if we were meant to be alone on a deserted island, we would all have our own private islands, but we don't have that. Number 2 is be brave. Take calculated risks. Take chances to open doors and bring in new light in your life. That is something that is really not hard to do. Again, courage is a muscle. We can work it just like we can work our muscles in the gym. Identify your passions, the ways you can contribute, and take steps. Just keep taking steps. And it might be a little uncomfortable at first, but there's amazing joy and unbelievable new vistas behind those doors. The last thing is something that is a concept. And this concept is in my introduction of my book, Happiness. And it's a concept from Aristotle, and it's called eudaimonia. And we can contrast that with something they call hedonia, which is sort of a hedonism thing. Eudaimonia is focus on creating the best out of yourself. Focus on, I work on my writing. I worked hard on this book. I continue to push this forward with speeches and podcasts because that's the best of what I've got to offer the world. I can't do science or anything like that. So this eudaimonia concept is live your life that way. We make the best out of yourself and figure out how you can contribute that to the greater good. And Gina, if you can tie that together in a package, it's just phenomenal how much more fulfilled you will be and how much more meaning you find. And how much light you spread to others around you, which is all bounces back at you.
Mm-hmm. It's all interconnected. So Judy, I want to thank you so much for sharing your passion, your mission, your message, your journey, and just being so, what's the word I'm looking for? The energy with which you shared your story is so inspiring. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I was born caffeinated.
Right? Me too. I tell people that all the time. I don't need coffee. I was born this way.
Hey, would you like a cup of coffee? Decaf, please. I was born caffeinated.
I totally feel that. People are like, oh my gosh, are you ever going to slow down? Well, when I die, I'm sure I'll.
When I die. That's my line, yeah.
Awesome. Well, today I've been speaking with Judy Holland. She's the author of Happiness, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home. And if you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 156, I will have links to Judy's website, her book, her YouTube channel. And if you want to reach out to her, do that there. While you're there, please leave your name and email address. I would love to have you as a part of my tribe. You'll get a gift, and I'll periodically be reaching out, just sharing the journey that I'm on as well. I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join in on this conversation. And like Judy said, expand your horizons in some way each and every day. Take bitty baby steps if that is what is comfortable, and recognize the great value that you bring to the world just in what you've experienced. Your successes, your failures, your joys, your sorrows. This second half of life is your opportunity to take all of that together and do something powerful and wonderful that only you can do. So please, buck up, get courageous, take that next best step. And thank you so much for being a part of our tribe today. We look forward to sharing more inspirational steps and resources with you in the future. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.